Good evening, everybody. Please come on in if you want to join us. It's wonderful to have you here tonight for what is poised to be a very intriguing, inspiring, and thought-provoking panel discussion that Louisville's famous Hannah Drake, activist, performer, poet, thinker, philosopher, is going to moderate. And she is joined, and Hannah will introduce the different panelists. So I'm going to share their names. Kopi Darku, and Allison Glenn, who guest curated Promise Witness Remembrance for the Street Art Museum and is now the senior curator of the Public Art Fund in New York City. And wonderful to have you back. Lance Newman. And Yero. So this panel discussion is focused around the notion of there are Black artists in the future, but I'm sure that we will also touch upon our history and the many things that we can never forget, and just the fact that we have to, as much as we possibly can, avoid any type of amnesia, which I think we are unfortunately also known for. There are many truths that we have to acknowledge. There are many things that we have to work through. And I know that in the conversation, all of these artists will touch upon the histories that they had to wrestle through and how they're also at the same time imagining new futures for Black artists. So with no further ado, here's Hannah Drake and this incredible panel of artists. And I also want to acknowledge Stephen Riley, who was the director during Promise Witness Remembrance. And he also led the production and the publication of this incredible book that is being released tonight around Promise Witness Remembrance, the important exhibition that was curated around Amy Sherrill's portrait of Breonna Taylor and her very unjust murder. So thank you, Stephen, for being here. And then I also want to acknowledge Toya Northington, who I'm so incredibly honored to call her my colleague. She is now our Director of Inclusion. Now I'm getting it wrong already, now that I've come up with it. Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And she was our community strategist at the time. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. So I've already been introduced, and I know at least two people on the panel, but I will let you all introduce yourself. You can start over here with you, Yero.
Hi, everybody. My name is Yero, T.A. Yero, but everybody calls me Yero because who wants to go around being called T.A. I am a visual storyteller by passion, a corporate photographer by trade, and I am owner of Two Hearts Media, and I'm really just very excited that I am able to be a part of such a distinguished panel. To be up here on stage with you, these people are just amazing. So excited. And I'm just really grateful to be a part of just this experience, period. The exhibit, I was a part of the exhibit, that was an experience. Taking pictures for the exhibit, that was experience. Just life, be life-ing sometimes. And I'm just really excited that I'm able to be here.
And now you're in the collection of the State Museum.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kopi Darku. I'm an artist. I work primarily in paint, but I do a lot of digital media too. And fortunately, through the platforms of social media, I was able to create sort of video snippets during the protest that aligned with this book and this opportunity. And my day job is usually in education. That's usually how I'm pushing for change, and you'll hear in some of the responses to the panel questions that when we switched to 2020, as much as there's great work being done in education, the art side of me really spoke up because it was time to raise some voices. So I'm so happy that as we're halfway through, or a little more than halfway through 2022, we're still talking about these relevant things and talking about how art that comes from us will continue to impact not only now, but in the future. So I'm very happy to be in this panel.
Right on. Yeah. Y'all save your hands. It's gonna be a lot of clapping tonight. You know what I mean? My name is Lance G. Newman II. I'm a Renaissance man of sorts. I wear many hats. I'm a visual. That's the only way I've been able to explain it lately. I do a lot of things. I do visual art. I am a spoken word poet. I am an educator. I am a host. I am a director, and so on and so forth. You can Google me. First 3 pages is all me. But yes, the purpose here in this work that we're all doing, right, is to continue the narrative. We often have tragedy strike us, and then we talk about it. We have meetings, we have panel discussions, and then no action happens behind that. So this panel discussion is to further that conversation and also come up with some action plans and steps that we all can take as we move forward. So thank y'all for coming forward.
Thank you. I'm Allison Glenn, and I had the privilege to guest curate Promise Witness Remembrance here at the Speed a year ago, 2 years ago, year and a half. When was it? Yeah, it was about a year and a half ago that it opened, and it's hard to believe it was only a year and a half. And I'm looking at like this side of the room because outside of Stephen and Toya, also Adrienne and Hannah were key parts of that team, and so many other people that haven't been named. It was a group effort. I also see some steering committee members in the audience, so I'm just really happy to be here and be in dialogue with you all. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm normally on panels, not moderating a panel. So I'm like keeping myself from jumping in and adding my 2 cents. You know, but I'm probably gonna jump in sometime. We just got a little family talk. We family up here, okay? So this is for all of the panelists. I will specify some questions to people, but just jump in. We like we had a cookout. They just here, right? This is the front porch. Y'all just get to see what happens on our porch, right? So for all of the panelists, how did the events of 2020 with the murder of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, amongst many others, these were the 3 names that we heard, but there were others. And of course, COVID-19, how did that impact your practice and shape the future of your art?
As everyone looks at me. Okay, so I'm just gonna be all the way honest and say that all those events happened and it made me realize that life is super short. And I can be scared and not do anything and still not change the world, or I can actually do something and still be scared and possibly change the world. So when the long list of names of people who've been murdered and unjustly taken, when I heard about Breonna Taylor, the fact that she did nothing, like she was asleep, and she changed the world. So then I can do something. So I'm like, okay, I've been taking pictures with my camera for the longest time. Now there's tens of thousands of photos that haven't seen the world, that could actually change something, can do something. So let me go ahead and say, hey, I am here. Let me use my voice. That's because the power is not in having a voice, it's actually using it. So I'm like, okay, well, let's go ahead and do that. And then COVID hit. So now everything was really shut down. I'm like, okay, but I can still use my camera because people need to see what's happening. People can't see what they don't know about. So I'm taking pictures everywhere and going to protests and actually showing what needs to be shown, whether people like it or not. And getting in touch with people to say, hey, this is what's happening. Here's proof of what's happening. Because one of the things I do from my camera, photos are proof that we existed. That's literally every time I pick up my camera is to show proof. So when everything happened, things were shutting down, but life was still lifing. Let me take pictures. Put the pictures anywhere. Social media is really how the world was able to be seen. So now this is my time to say, here is what's happening. So that really sort of kind of pushed me forward to say, this is what I love to do. This is my passion. Let me share my passion with you guys. And it really just sort of kind of took off, and I'm really excited that, you know, I was able to share my passion, because it's really what it is. It's not a job. I don't do it for the money because it's not that much in it. So it's really a passion that just drives me. So when everything shut down and life was still life, and I went ahead and said, okay, let's do this because people need to see. So it's really what pushed me is people are dying and people are still living, and everybody needs to know everything that happens in between.
I guess I'll just jump in since go down the line. But for me, as much as I really embrace my artistic side, I'm glad Yero touched on it. You know, this outfit comes because I am the only person in my family born in the U.S. My family comes from Ghana, and I say this because my parents are very practical. They're like, no, you're smart enough to be a doctor, you're smart enough to be this. I don't want you to be an artist. So I learned to kind of put that on the back burner. And as I was working in education from the late 90s until now, I always felt like I was pushing for progress. But back to, it's almost like a tipping point. I would say from 2014 to 2020, you know, people were like, what? And long story short, when Ahmaud Arbery is killed, I'm part of a social media thing where Run with Ahmaud to try and just raise awareness. When Brianna is killed, I'm like, what? How is someone who's working for the city in the healthcare industry, Black woman, killed like this, and it's not an issue? You know, it seemed to be such a small thing in Louisville. And of course, when George Floyd gets killed, well, of course, Minneapolis blows up, and I knew right then, oh, well, Louisville's about to blow up now for Brianna now. And similar for me, there was an eruption of my passion to make change. I knew that I wanted to do more art because the pandemic was giving me more time to go to my garage, go do some artistic things. But as I ran for Ahmaud, I was like, wait a minute, I'm getting strength from social media, seeing some stuff out there. Let me make sure I put my things out there too, so that we realize we're a community. And so I would say my focus on painting, my focus on text that sort of drills you into specific issues that we need to talk about, that all sort of materialized into my stories that I was posting online. And now it's part of my artistic process where I am comfortably speaking to protest issues of injustice, because first off, I can't not talk about it anymore. It seems that it wasn't a problem for America for these things to continue to happen. So I'm like, we need to be louder about this. But it was surreal that it sort of just easily transitioned into my art and made my art more powerful, so to speak. I was working on a series where I was focused on outer space and creating alternate orbs. It's very kind of Rothko-ish in that there's two colors and then there's a very simple geometric form right there in the forefront. But in my mind, I was starting to create alternate worlds where Black people can go for safety, because I was afraid you're not gonna find it here on Earth, because if Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd get killed like this, and this is not an issue for America, where else can we go? So that's continued to inform how I push my passion into the art. And to tell you the truth, it's like a higher octane gas that I'm starting to live off of, that I've never really had before in my artistic life. So it's the time. It's almost like there are no times like these. It's time to really raise our voices, and Lance kind of touched on it. This narrative has never been as featured or given the spotlight as long as it has, as we are in right now. So it's on us to continue this narrative until we see more progress in this area, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because like when we talk about like social justice things and these things that happen, we don't have the discussions that we have, right? And COVID really made a lot of people sit down and kind of sit with their families, right? Ask these questions, tell their family how they feel about these certain things, and then you realize your grandparents are like, he deserved it, he should have listened to the cops, and you're sitting there, you have these discussions, and COVID really allowed those discussions. But to the question that you asked about, like, how did the artistic practice, now Hannah, you've known me, me and Hannah has known me, we have to pretend like that? Hannah has known me since I was very, very young, and we were both going to the open mic on 18th and Muhammad Ali, and poetry has been my mainstay for the past 20 years in Louisville. Now, when COVID happened, I could not have poetry shows, right? I could not teach poetry classes, and in poetry shows, if you've ever been to one, these are the places where you hear the names of people shot by police, right? This is where you hear the Michael Newbys and the Yalos, like, because people are writing poetry about that. All this death happened, and the poets had no place to speak. The poets had no place to, no platform to yell these things, right? And it's very interesting, like, now that things are opened up a little bit, you get a lot more poets with the themes of these Black deaths. We just had Southern Fry, and a lot of the poets were talking about Breonna Taylor. And it says that, or, that tells me that, like, COVID making us kind of go inside really changed how we hear about these things, how we hear about these deaths. Personally, y'all, I have contracts at JCPS. All of those were gone. Anything that I had inside a building was out. I have been hosting the KMAC Poetry Slam for 8 years now, and we couldn't even have a slam. So what I did, it forces the artist to adapt, and I loved it. Like, it was learning poetry again, right? It was like going to the open mic and having people snap to a line that I wrote all over again. I picked up video editing, right? I paid for the subscription to Premiere Pro. I created a KMAC poetry series that you all can find on YouTube, and I edited that whole, shot it, got my director on, I put on a different hat. I also leaned into my visual arts more because I can't speak. I have to paint a picture using something else than my words. So it made me go inward. It made me stay home and, get to a canvas. And everybody's talking about the social justice points. I just want to talk about the process of being an artist and then having the lockdown. I'm going to get to the social justice stuff soon.
So for me, it's a little different. I'm not an artist, I'm very much a creative person, but I'm a curator, and I'm an art historian and a researcher and a writer. And what this moment, I think, I wouldn't actually agree that this is the only time in our country's history where issues of social justice and civil unrest have come to a popular conversation, or become a popular conversation point in households across America, not just the communities that are impacted. And so I think, to Rafaela's really smart point in the beginning, that we must not have amnesia, and to kind of sit in that in this moment. So I just wanted to say that. And then what the pandemic did for a lot of people, I think, to your point, was people paid attention, whether it was turning inwards or watching the news or taking the time to pay attention to these issues that were happening because they didn't have anything else to do. And I firmly believe that artists help us understand what is happening in the world, and the way the pandemic shifted how I work is that it made me understand clearly what my priorities were as an arts worker as a curator, as perhaps in some ways a gatekeeper, although I wouldn't take that on. I don't think I'm a gatekeeper, but I do think that institutions and people that work within them are gatekeepers, so to speak. The opportunity to work with this community and to work with all of you in different ways shifted the way that I work. So I now work in public art in New York City, and I had to shift. I was at Crystal Bridges at the time. I've spent a small time in Texas, decided I wanted to be in New York working in public art. And the work that I do is free and open to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it is just a very different space. So that's kind of how this opportunity and that moment changed how I work.
Thank you. And I think, Lance, you touched on for our next question, so I would start with you. You talked about Southern Fried. Of course you know what that's Southern Fried. And I know, so I've been to Southern Fried and of course Lipstick Wars, which is Rihanna's slam as well. And a lot, if not almost all of the poems were about, if it wasn't about police brutality, it was just something very horrific. You know, even Gabby won, and you know the poem that Gabby wrote about addiction. It was always so horrific. And I thought, after going through 2020, I don't want to sit and listen to poems about 2020.
Right.
You know, even as a poet, I ain't feel like hearing all that. You know, and so these images of violence that we see, right? We all saw the video, the infamous George Floyd video, right? And how do these images and hearing and witnessing violence impact your work? And as an artist, is it our job to take that on? Is there a violence and joy balance? So how do you as an artist find that balance? Because this is the last thing I'm gonna say. See, that's why y'all don't ask me to be the name on moderator no more. Because it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, y'all, that violence, and I'm gonna say black violence and black death, sells anything. And the minute you talk about joy, you ain't selling no pictures.
Yeah.
So go on with that question.
Yeah, no, I think and you know, blackness sells everything. Everything. I mean, Africa is the greatest ghostwriter in history. You know what I mean? Like, in civilization, like, you know what I mean? We all got it from there. So, black sells, period. But I will say that, like, Black death and just the images of death. First of all, Hannah's talking about Southern Fried, the Southeastern Regional Poetry Competition. It's the largest poetry tournament in the nation, and we hosted it here in Louisville. And she was speaking about the poems being very graphic, being very sad, being very, like, tragic, right? The only reason why is because it was a slam and people want to pull heartstrings so they get points, which I hate. Because the artist's job is just to reflect humanity. The artist's job is just to reflect the society in which they live in, and the artist has every right to choose what they want to reflect or what they want to show, you know what I mean? My practice, like, anybody familiar with World Star? It's a website where you can see the most ratchet things, like, in general. It was once owned by a black dude, but now a white dude owns it, and the content is it's very interesting. Like, now that they're owned by somebody else, the content is not uplifting. The content is full of death. It's full of, like, news reports of robberies and stuff, violent crimes. It's full of, like, just toxic, like, mentalities. But I'm addicted to it. I don't know what it is. Like, the artist in me loves the tragedy, right? But when I have my art, I don't want my art to be tragic. I don't want tragedy to live in my pieces, because my pieces will live somewhere else. So my fear is that as an artist and also as a human being, I'm being desensitized to Black death, right? Like, Rodney King cool, Diallo cool, but now social media and phones and everything's quick. It happens every week. I think the new statistic is like every 36 hours, not even that, maybe every 24 hours, you know what I mean? Somebody is killed by police, Black or white. right? So then the conversation becomes, I don't want to be desensitized to it. I feel like that's how we got to this situation in the first place. And in that fight to stay away from desensitization, I don't watch the videos anymore. Like, George Floyd was the last snuff film I watched, purposely. I can't watch the rest, and I don't want that voice inside me to be drowned out by all the other voices of pain. We're artists, man. From picking my kids up, that's art. Like, I always say life imitates art, art doesn't imitate, art imitates life, life does not imitate art. And a lot of poets get that mixed up. They think that they can just write a poem about something without experiencing it. But the true art in visual, verbal, audio, whatever, the true art is imitating those things that you have experienced in your own life. And I'm choosing to do that instead of the things going on in others. Hey y'all, this is a panel, so like turn your mics on and like chime in, be like, I know, Lance, that's what I'm talking about.
Right, I didn't want to interrupt, the train.
No such thing. We have a combo. We're on the porch.
Right, we on the porch, that's right. Don't nobody, we on the porch. One of the things that you talk about, Lance, is the World Star thing. That's, for me, as a photographer, as a storyteller, I make sure, I try my hardest to not shoot those things. Wow. To not capture those things, because it's everywhere. People only, let me say it the right way. Sometimes people only focus on the death and miss the life. So because, again, but when you're just surrounded, you're saturated by so much death, so much violence, so much you will miss the flowers, you will miss the trees, you will miss the good, happy thoughts where a little girl just learned how to jump rope. That's joy, that's happiness. They learned how to tie their shoes. When you posted that your daughter decorated her shoes for school, when I tell you that made me almost cry, because, okay, so his daughter decorated her shoes with smiley faces, but also with caution tape to back off if I'm not smiling. Like that was real. This child is telling you the truth. Like, I'm smiling, but not all the time, so watch out. So just that kind of fun stuff to make you smile. And then I scroll up on my Facebook and it tells me about somebody who's died. Like, I don't want my timeline, my social media to always have trauma, always have death, always have somebody getting whooped, somebody getting beat. And it's not even about color at this point. It's just because blood is red. So all that stuff, I will go and shoot ice cream. I will go and shoot puppy dogs. Let me say I will capture the image of puppy dogs. I will, because words are real. Words, let me not, because I will be
Yero out here shooting puppies.
Right, but I will capture the image of puppy dogs and ice cream and stuff, because there's so much, not everybody focuses on the good. And so if I'm one less person focusing on the bad, focusing on the good, that's more content for someone else. That's my therapy.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
So I really appreciate this line of thought, because when we were developing the exhibition, I felt like I didn't want to re-traumatize anybody. We all have access to these images. I didn't watch the George Floyd video. I can't watch things like that. I refuse it. What is different between what you're capturing now in images and what you captured during the protests? Why, because there's a completely different, I'm gonna let you.
So the sad part is that the protest pictures that were chosen were still supposed to be about joy, but the context of it made it tragic. Because one of my pictures, it's literally at a prayer meeting. It's prayer. But if you don't have the right context of it, if you caption it wrong, you'll think that she's, crying because somebody died. No, she's actually just asking for prayer. So capturing the moment and also being able to narrate the moment at the same time is what's so important. It's two sides to the coin, right? Because In the images, 15 minutes later, I have SWAT team. I can literally go out to a prayer meeting and turn the corner and now I have a row of cops in front of me.
Yeah.
So I purposely made sure to not capture violence and action, but the aftermath of it. And you can take it, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So you can take it and let it really tell you how you feel about the moment. Because if I didn't tell you that the picture was about prayer, would you think it was about prayer? Or would you think she was trying to be consoled because something different happened? That's why a lot of my pictures, it really tells you what you're feeling without me having to.
And that's interesting to figure out, like, who is curating the narrative, right? So, like, as a curator, right, if as the artist, we wanted to say one thing, right? But we often are asked to speak somewhere or do something for something, and that something already has a lens, you know what I mean? So, like, what does the artist even do in that space? Like, I'm happy that I'm finally got some work in a institution, but at the same time, the caveat is the institution's narrative. Like, what do you think about, like, why, or I guess, not why, but I guess how much control does the institution have in molding the narrative in which artists place their pieces in?
And I want to ask you to piggyback on that. What was the narrative when you did the curation of things here? Because one thing I appreciated going back to this question was this beautiful picture of Brianna, which we never see, right? Because the media is going to tell us, this is what you need to think about this person. And we're going to go and pull up every social media picture and everything.
And they barely showed it.
Right.
You know, if they showed her, they showed, you know.
Right.
Okay.
But the beautiful, and you have to walk down this long hallway, you probably did that on purpose. And then
She did on purpose.
right. And you're always staring at because you're a curator, that's what you do. But go ahead.
Well,
yeah.
I'm gonna start with the last thing you said. The reason why the portrait was placed there was to carry you through. And I imagine that there'd be many people visiting the Speed who had never come here before because they didn't feel like the framework or the institution represented the conversations they were trying to have. Or as Ramona from the steering committee said, she visited the Speed as a child and she felt like it didn't represent artwork made by people who looked like her about people who looked like her, right? So there was a lot of like hearing and understanding what was happening in this particular place. I have never felt more supported as a curator than I did working here with this team under this leadership that was leading the museum and all the partners, and the groundwork that was laid before I arrived was incredible. So the framework question, I would hope that you would have agency in that space. Because Yero and I had conversations, actually all the photographers I worked with, because it was the pandemic, because I didn't live here, there was a lot of trust. The steering committee was the group that gave me the photographers' names. They challenged me to work with more local artists, and I said, that sounds great. Can you help me? Thank you. Can you help me? Right? You know, and they said absolutely, and they built a spreadsheet, and I went through and went to people's Instagrams, websites, and randomly called people, and you know, it was like, it's not the way we typically work, but the conversations we had helped me select the images to be included. So I hope that you feel like you have agency as artists in spaces that you're working, and I hope you know that if you don't feel like the framework or the context that is being placed on your work is the right framework or context, that you speak up. Or you say, I actually don't want to be a part of this, or you're not getting this right? Because it should be more of an open dialogue between curator.
Yeah, I like that.
And one of the things that, for an artist, for myself, when you were asking for photos, I made sure to include only black and white photography. I did not want any type of color to take away from what you're going to feel just by looking at it. because the picture that ultimately got selected, the girl who's praying for, as a photographer, you know, I look for details. I'm looking at all the details and everything that could possibly be misconstrued or misinterpreted. And the girl who was praying, she just so happened to be in all red with a red bandana in her pocket. I did not want her identity to be associated with, oh, she must be blah, blah, blah. Nope. She is just a girl who is trying to act, who's asking for, and at that point, I know that she's just asking for prayer. But if people are just looking at it at a glance, they might go, oh, well, she must have done something, some of this blah, blah, blah. Nope, I wanted to, and that's me taking control over the narrative of what people potentially could see.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, take color all the way out of it. I only submitted the black and white because I want you to just see the image and nothing else. I know people say, oh, I don't see color. You do. You do. I mean, there's no other way, because you know that the sun is yellow, even though you might not be looking at it for the yellowness of it, but the sun is yellow. You know what it is. So I didn't want the subliminal images of knowing what colors are associated with what to overpower my picture. So that's one of the things that I took that power back.
Agency.
Yeah.
Agency.
Absolutely.
I find that, as I think about the images and how, unfortunately, death sells, usually in my work, I'm not focusing on anything like that. But I just recall, in terms of the draw of it, I think of, there's so many things that come to mind, but the basic, like, school fight, you know, and that the allure of violence, you know. If someone was doing something nice for someone down the hall, like, oh, blank and blank just helped pick up the books for that person, you know, no one runs to that. But if someone's like, fight, 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 everyone was running. And I link that to what sells in our media, you know, that's it. And so, unfortunately, yeah, I'm trying to focus on joy, but in an artistic world where your popularity or how you're being viewed will drive your success, it's usually more profitable to focus on death.
Do you think that is for black artists? And I'm gonna go here with this Toni Morrison.
Hell yeah.
Because it seems like a white artist, they talk about, look at the ceiling in the 16th chapter, and it's beautiful, and look at the beautiful picture, and look at and it's the stunning woman just being, right? So is this black artist, our art will not sell if it's not traumatic? Are other artists allowed to create art that's joyful and it's expected of us? And if we are going to be in these spaces, why didn't y'all call Yero before Breonna Taylor died? You were still a photographer then, wasn't you? Okay, you know, I mean, you were still making, so did it take Breonna Taylor dying for y'all to know it was a black artist or a Lance Newman or you see what I'm saying?
So, and to be all the way out, not to take away from the power of that statement, I really wasn't out there until Breonna Taylor. Because
there were
others, yeah, there were absolutely others, but
Yeah, I was out there tough and Mike.
yeah, you've been out there.
No,
You've
but
been out there, yeah.
then the police, the LMPD, man, they pulled up on me, like, came out the car, like, 8 people deep, guns out, bulletproof vests, scared the mess out of me. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm not doing nothing social. I'm in the house with my social protest, you know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna post something. Intimidation is real. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's super real, unfortunately. And one of the things that, no, I'll be trying to make sure that I say things right because this stuff is recorded. but so for me, as a black artist, I don't necessarily look at my audience because most of this stuff is just for me to get it out of my system. And you already know that we gotta be twice as good just to get half as much attention. And so I take that, because of that, I take that out of it all the way together. If I did this for profit, I wouldn't be doing it.
And I'm gonna say no to your question about, like, do black artists have to create traumatic images? It's like, think about all the traumatic images of black people. It was taken by white people. Right, from the lynching pictures, right? That wasn't no black photographer taking that picture. Emmett Till is probably the only, like, picture I would say was purposely, like, you know, his mother made them put that in there, you know what I mean? It wasn't
Because she wanted truth.
because she wanted truth, right. So it's like, I don't think, and if we think of all of our like heroes within the art community or in the art world and they're Black, nothing ever is really like violent. It's tragic, but it's only tragic because you know the context in which the artist was making it, right? If I'm looking at a Betty Saar, right, and like her tarot hands and all her pieces, like there's a sorrow in it, but there's a humanity in it. And I don't think that I don't think any Black artists really, other than like rappers, you know what I mean? Focus on the negativity of the existence. Like poets, painters, sculptors, they are always capturing the beauty and like realness, the humanity of Black people as Black artists. And I think when the Black artist tries to move to using nothing but negativity, because it does sell, you know, short career.
And I think it's just because, for me, when I see people doing that, is they're trying to heal. Black artists is trying to get it out of our system, and this is how we're not gonna I'm not gonna focus on the tragedy that happens every single day, because I can turn on the news 5, 6, 10, and 11 o'clock, and it be the same type of thing. But nobody says how somebody went to go volunteer at a nursing home to help. Like, they painted a school or something like that. They don't do that. So I feel like I feel like the artists that I see that are on my timeline, that I make sure to give my attention, my dollars to, are just trying to heal. And by healing themselves, they're trying to heal the world. And if they have a platform to try and heal, just pass the healing on. That's really how I feel, how I want in my mind, in a pure world, that that's how the artists would do it.
Yeah, to jump in, I tend to try and be optimistic. However, we can't escape those tragic things in our lives, and that's like most of the trauma that's haunting us. You know, is that we haven't addressed that. So as I speak to sort of my trajectory as an artist, there was a goal in me to try and be as universal and as embracing of all cultures. We're trying to make art that would speak to all of them. But as you touched on healing, that's what really amped me up in 2020, is that I was seeing all this tragedy and I was afraid that it wasn't gonna go accounted for. And I'm like, if there's no overall justice, at least let me make art that speaks to Black people, that helps them realize, I see this is wrong, we can commiserate together. And so, and I see you, and it takes me to very powerful writers. We know Toni Morrison, I read a lot of N.K. Jemisin, Okorafor, and long story short, these women have been writing stories that unfortunately have tragic storylines, but are so beautiful, and are helping me realize, wow, this was probably healing for them to create this, to speak this storyline, and to share it. And then other writers, more contemporary, Layman, as he was coming up, the older writers or older people in his life, his elders, were saying, you know, we need more people writing to us, for us. And I would say that usually in a very commercial world, I'm gonna try and be like you, Hannah, and just say it directly. You know, if you're making art for a Black community, you may not get as much money because the Black community doesn't have as much money as the white community. So if you don't make art that's more universal, you're probably limiting yourself. However, as I've grown older, I'm like, whoa, some of the best art comes when we're focused on that community and making sure that community knows it's for them. And I think it has a lot of ripple effects that become more powerful and then could translate into commercial success. And so back to it, once you get to the stage, you're not in it for the profit. Because if you're starting to focus more on the to us, for us, you know that you're possibly going to not address a certain population that could really help you financially. But I think it's much more gratifying and healing to make that move.
So I get a question then. This is a catch-22, because what I'm hearing is the framework that is placed on the work, or the expectation that's placed on the work, is that it's fitting some kind of ticking a box, right? Or it's fitting some kind of narrative. Or why didn't people call Yero before Brandon Taylor was killed, right? But right, of course. But I mean, this is one example of like a real legitimate, honest truth. And then the second question, the catch-22 to that is like the expectation of representation, right? So the expectation that Black artists, first off, that there's one essential Black experience, which we know is a fallacy, and that Black artists are meant to speak to this, and/or images of trauma will sell. It seems like there's no way to win. So how does one navigate that space? Like, how do you, if the expectation is to speak to a kind of way of being, which doesn't just happen for Black artists, it happens for artists from the global majority, which is like my new favorite phrase, as opposed to saying like minority, global majority. So how does one contend to deal with that as a maker?
Well, I want to flip it back to you, because I'm going to ask the question.
I'm trying to like speak, moderate.
Because you have this special space as a curator. So you get to, right, curate, create a space. So how do you do that and represent those who are the global majority?
I love that question.
You're welcome.
I was trying to sneak moderate. Sorry. The work that I've been interested in and the work that I do, I was really mentored by a lot of great curators and artists. I had the opportunity to work with Kelly Jones and Naima Keith, the Astor Gates. I've had a lot of incredible people show me ways to do things, just by example. And I've made it my business and my work to always have, if there's a conversation around a theme, to make sure that the conversation is around a theme and it's inclusive of artists from the global majority. And language is also really important. So knowing where and how to frame a conversation, to frame an artwork and an idea that doesn't reduce it or minimize it or essentialize it, and center what the artist is centering. So if the work that you're making is talking about your experience as a Black person in the United States, then the label that's talking about this work or the essay will reflect that. If you're thinking about the color blue, I'm not going to try to tie it to some mythic idea of why Black people love the color blue. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just not going to do that. And I think that there's ways of reorienting and decentralizing that I employ. I don't think I know there are, and these are the things that I do. And also, the Western art historical canon positions itself in a way to be the authority. So one just has to like decentral that, right? And I'm really, personally, this idea of archipelagic thought, which is like a kind of thought process that anchors itself in the idea of an archipelago, right? Which is a group of islands. And the idea that thought can be, it can be non-linear, that ideas can also be, in a way, shared, right? Perspectives don't, like it's a way of approaching anything through that kind of framework. So I could talk for hours about this, actually, but I think I'm not going to.
No, feel free.
We're going to.
Yeah, got it. And,
I'm going to ask you all one more question
well, hold
before
on, Anna, she just asked
I
me
know.
Okay.
I know. I love you. Because we're going to have Q&A.
Oh, got you.
So I just want to ask you all before we have the Q&A, what do you look like as a Black artist in the future? And what do you want for Black artists in the future?
Kofi.
Okay, so in the future, I think we're gonna continue to embrace these identities. I think I have some controversial things to say, but culturally, we know, I mean, I was just listening to a feature on the Gullah Geechee and how that island off of the coast of Georgia has less than 26 original descendants there, and they're trying to bring people back to keep that culture alive so that we can understand, basically, they were brought over through enslavement, but eventually created their own colony back in the late 1700s and created their own, they call themselves like a little Africa because they started their own culture back then. And I'm saying that Black culture, of course, should be preserved and appreciated, but I think as we get to the 2100s, that maybe we evolve and we stop thinking so limitedly about what this race designation is. We still continue to celebrate what it is, but I think in the future, as we talk about amplifying our voices, making sure we call out the issues that are affecting our community, there may be an evolution that is beyond just Black, in my opinion.
Yeah, Yero, you thinking? You still thinking?
I'm still thinking.
Cool. I'm weird. So like, I often think that we are just living iterations of the past over and over again and trying to correct the mistakes that we're living. So I'm completely convinced that it is 1922. You know what I mean? The 1920s. The 2020, right? That was Tulsa, that was Wilmington, that was the red summer. All right, 2020 was our red summer, just kind of contemporarily. But that being said, when we talk about, if I know the past, then I can predict the future. And as more solidarity comes, as we have more inclusion, the concentration of those who cap for exclusion, those who, like, the hatred is concentrating. And as the hatred concentrates, you will see more violence. You will see more, nationalism. You will see more. It's the same thing happened in Germany. You know what I mean? It's like as the world gets bigger and we start saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, an idea of we need to protect our sovereignty, or we need to protect this, like, those personalities get amplified because nobody's talking like that no more. Now everybody's talking kumbaya. Who's talking coup d'etat? And the coup d'etat folk, they're going to be risen up, they're going to be lifted up, and it's going to be so much worse. I'm pessimistic as hell. Like, I don't think they're, like, Black people in the future, we're going to be in the future. We're in the past, we're in the present, we're going to be in the future. Dominant gene trait, it works like that, baby. I don't know what to tell you. Either you're gonna mix in, you're gonna mix out. But like, I know we will be in the future, but what will the mentality be, right? Like, white supremacy is not a skin color or a political party. It's a mindset, and a Black person can have the same mindset as a white person. So Black people in the future looks like Clarence Thomas in the future. You know what I mean? It looks like more what? Clarence Thomas ain't a good one?
Don't lose track.
Okay. I was like, is that not a good one? It's just more, you feel me? It's just more people in power to oppress somebody. Systems do not change much, right? The people who have power in those systems change. And that is the only thing that I expect from the future.
I want to offer something, and Yero, I'm going to let you close this out. We're living in this...
No pressure. Okay.
We're living within this imaginary, right? So coloniality, right? It is someone's vision. It is collective vision around finding new worlds, right? Not settler colonial mentality, which is what it actually is. So what if we unimagined all that has been imagined? What if we unimagined it? That's kind of what I hope for.
Okay, nice. Okay, yeah.
Unimagining. Yeah,
Because he was ready. He was bringing the mic up.
Yeah. What if you unimagined the system that's in place right now? What if you decided to unimagine it? What does it look like to unimagine? And I think that that's what Black artists will be doing in the future. That is my hope.
I absolutely love that.
So when I think of Black artists in the future, and I hate to fangirl up here just a little bit. It's not moving off the sidewalk. It's legit, like, this is me, this is what I'm doing, this is, if you don't like it, there's so much more space for you to walk past me. The being unapologetically Black and standing in it and not worrying about if I'm gonna have my job or if I need to cut my hair or if I need to do, I can't wear this particular dress because it's too Black or too ethnic, and just not caring about it. There's children, so I can cuss, but it's one of those things. Like, that's what I see. I see it happening now. That they're like, I'm not gonna do this anymore. Like, I'm really not gonna say I'm sorry. Like, I apologize for not giving an F about your feelings because you never gave one about mine. And so here we are in 2022, and if I have to apologize for the tone that you think you heard in my voice, I don't know what to tell you. If I have to keep saying in emails, I have to email per my last email versus I told you what I told you before. I don't like that whole code switching. I wish that would go away. I see it going away. I see it. It's a bird flying by. Because I'm tired. I'm so tired. Code switching is hard, y'all. I don't know if y'all know about it, but it's not something that I want in the future. I don't want to carry it with me, and I promise you I don't walk on the sidewalk. I mean, I don't know if y'all know what I mean when I say that. So, Miss Hannah Drake had a piece where she challenged Black people, not even just Black females, but just Black people, to stop moving out of the way to let other cultures go past you when you have every right to walk in a straight line. You don't have to curve just because you see somebody else coming. There is plenty of space. They can walk around. You were walking here too. So that's what I mean when I say that I'm not moving off the sidewalk, because there's space. There's plenty of space. So that's what I see as Black people in the future, not moving off the sidewalk because I'm tired.
I just want to jump in there because it's true. As much as we celebrate this as a special thing, what she's talking about, this would be commonplace. It's almost like we wouldn't be just celebrating Black culture because finally, it's popular to do. And I like to piggyback on that. There are so many, like, I can't wear this at a workplace. Psych, I can now, because in the future, a Black artist is going to be able to do that. So I might as well just start doing that now. And I agree with that vision, that in the future, we are less apologetic and more just who we are and doing what we do and not necessarily being celebrated excessively for that.
It seems like, and then we'll start our question and answer, that the future and unimagining, which I love, starts today. It's today. And you're preparing something for the future. Right, so you can be unapologetic and you can wear your thing and you can create art and you can curate spaces where tragedy doesn't have to happen for Black artists to be pushed forward, because Black artists are creating art all the time. And when we unimagine spaces like this, it doesn't have to take the death of Breonna Taylor to bring in all of this genius in Louisville. It's here, it exists, we ain't going nowhere. Today, tomorrow, or in the future.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the question. They ain't gonna invite me back, y'all.
I'm over here thinking about the Black future and like we talk about Black culture, right? Like in the future, I hope that we define Black culture. Like we talk about Black culture, and if you haven't heard the new Kendrick Lamar album, please listen to it. Listen to the song, it's Heart. It's the Heart, Part 5. And he's just talking about like, he said, in a land where hurt people hurt more people, F calling it culture. You know what I mean? So like, we have yet to define what Black culture is. I feel like collard greens, all this stuff, those was forcefulness. You know what I mean? Chitlins was forcefulness. It's not our culture. You know what I mean? Cussing each other out at the cookout, shooting each other. It's not our culture. Like, people are trying to push that. So I would love for Black Americans to define their culture. I'm sorry, I wanted to throw that in. We was talking about future.
Does anyone have questions?
Who got a question?
Does anyone have any?
That's something.
We got one.
Okay.
I'll let you.
Lance,
What one?
what's up? No, I like how you said, COVID, you was able to go inward. You know, can you talk a little more about, the support you got and then just what that process looked like? Because I, for one, love COVID too. It was my best friend. I was able to kind of hibernate and redevelop. So I appreciate what you said. I didn't hear it. I would wish you to explain a little more what that looked like and where are you in that process?
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. Cool. Right. We talk about support. Like, I came out as a visual artist in 2018, so people knew that I was creating visual pieces, and I also got a wonderful mentorship situation with Stan Squarewell. So y'all look him up. He's an awesome Black artist out the DC area, but lives in Louisville right now. But I was able to apprentice under him, and that's where I went. Like I went with my own artwork, and then I worked under him and saw all the stuff he was doing, because he still had shows in New York, and he still had shows in DC and Art Basel in Miami, and he was doing a lot of stuff. So the process, you talk about support, like folks, I guess, folks did kind of support that. I don't know, it helped that, it would help, one, my wife still had her job, that's always great. And then also, it helped that, like, we talk about spaces, right, and institutions. I believe in guerrilla art fair. You know what I mean? Like, I've hosted poetry shows in abandoned buildings, so when stuff closed down, I was like, I can still have my gallery, I'm just gonna do it in a parking lot. You know what I mean? I'm gonna still show my art, I'm still going to produce my art. And when you talk about the process, just inward and just personally, it gave me time to sit down. You said Kofi was your best friend. I love it. I loved it. I have social anxiety, so I started to produce way more.
I want to jump in and say, my process, it allowed me to like do an inventory. As much as I was a visual artist, I wasn't crediting myself for writing. There's a lot of writing that happens, and my wife is in the audience. I want to give her credit because she kind of encouraged me some 10 or 15 years ago to say, hey, you have some good things you should be writing down. And so as I say that, when I resuming, you can compartmentalize your work, I still have my day job. I am setting up a new studio in my garage for my visual painting artwork, but I'm also taking time inside the house to write, and it was more haphazard, but after I did this inventory, I'm like, wow, you got all these visual projects happening here, you have these writing projects. And then I realized there were also sound projects too. So the pandemic gave me a space to start to inventory my work, categorize it, and then also see what messages were in certain projects. And it's true, the ones that were speaking to healing, I was drawn more to. So I got deeper into those projects. And it also forced me to start to look at, okay, your work, about how much time are you spending at work, how much time are you spending with your family, how much time you spend with your art. Prior to the pandemic, art was getting very little from me. So the pandemic gave me that space to say, how can I realistically increase this in my life and still meet the needs of my day-to-day life? And I'm very grateful, like you're saying, as much, no one wants to get COVID, but yes, COVID was my friend for allowing me that space to get deeper with my process. And now it's much more manageable for me to say, okay, I need to advance the writing side, or I need to advance this side, I need to do this. Whereas before COVID, I wasn't thinking like that at all.
Let me just also say real quick, shout out to the spouses that let us be artists, because without the spouses creating the space so we can be free in who we are, I wouldn't be on this stage. So shout out to the spouses. Very much.
So I was raised by a member, my mother was a member of SNCC. My father was a leftist lawyer who represented a lot of members of SNCC, House of Un-American Activities Committee, all that stuff. So I was raised by a couple of radicals. I am as you can see, on the pale end of the scale. But, you know, as an artist and as a born and raised revolutionary, I was never a huge fan of the whole burn it down and start it up again, like, oh, let's just wait till it gets really, really bad, and then we can move in and fix. And I'm not a fan of violence, but like, how do we as artists, I'm tired of, you know, safe art, and even when it's not safe, like, there's this frustration of not moving as much as forward as we thought we would be. You know, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, like, where is the, you know, I could really swear right now, where is the, this is what is the shit. I'm tired of asking for permission.
Yeah, it's assimilation, right? So we live in a capitalistic, violent society. Our society was literally made on violence. There is only one language that is understood. In the 70s, and the folk in the 70s understood that. They knew that. And they were also ready to die for that. Nobody's ready to die for nothing. Nobody's ready to, that example, even more so, nobody's even ready to lead. Because they made their examples. They made their examples out of all the martyrs, all the political prisoners in the 70s. Nobody is trying to be at the forefront anymore. So what happens is you have these microcosms and these, what's it called when you manage somebody? Micromanaging. You have these micromanaging situations within the movement. And again, you say you don't want to burn it all down, but at the same time, join them, you can't, you gotta join them to beat them. Like, that hasn't worked either, you know what I mean? Obviously that hasn't worked. So it's like the artist, the revolutionary, one and the same. They have to either be willing to die or play it safe and keep making art or pictures people like to look at.
We have to go, I know, I'm sorry. But y'all can talk to each other afterwards.
I'll follow up with you, sir. I will talk with you about what we can do.
Shout out to everybody that came out today, y'all. Give it up for yourselves. Can we give it up for you? It's a whole bunch of OGs, good people in the crowd.
So I'm just gonna read this announcement because they told me to read this announcement. That's what happened, so that's what I did. It says, please join us in the, and I don't know what this is, Shelgren? Look at that, in the Shelgren Gallery upstairs to view the Promise exhibition and hear from Dr. Gabriel Jones Jr., who was the co-facilitator, researcher, and Dr. Leslie Harris, researcher about the program and the show. The Promise is a research and art-making program which began in March 2022, facilitating collective healing, reflection, and creative expression for members of the Black community in Louisville who have been affected by gun violence, and as part of the SPEED's Community Connect, y'all better go on and do it, SPEED. Community Connections Workshop Series. I didn't read this before, I could tell, but this sounds good. Building on the public engagement framework that grew out of the museum's 2021 exhibition. See, when you curated something, now see what was birthed out of it? Because you did it, girl. Promise, the witness, you did it. See, and that's the promise. You keep going and the remembrance that you created something, you unimagined, created something, and now here we go, we're having this tonight. I keep talking, but please go sit. Which reflected on the life of Breonna Taylor, her killing in 2020, and the Yero protests that followed in Louisville and around the world. So this is the promise part. This is the unimagined part, because you have the courage to come in. Oh, you want me to work with community members? This is the unimagined part. Go upstairs. Is it upstairs? I don't know where it's at. I'm making stuff up. In the Shelgren Gallery. Go upstairs and see it. See what was birthed out of what you created. That's wonderful. Am I supposed to say anything else?
No, let's just give a big round of applause for our panel.